August 31st, 1944. Metz, France. General George S. Patton stood in his command post staring at a map. His Third Army had just completed the fastest advance in military history. In 1 month, they had liberated Paris, crossed the Seine, and driven 300 miles across France. The German army was collapsing. The road to the Rhine was open. The road to Berlin was possible. Patton's tanks were running on fumes, but they were still running. His men were exhausted, but they were still fighting. He needed 3 days, 3 days of fuel, 3 days of supplies, and he could end the war by Christmas. Then the phone rang. It was Supreme Headquarters. The message was short and devastating. All fuel allocations to Third Army are suspended. Montgomery has priority. Patton's face went white, then red. He slammed the phone down so hard the receiver cracked. "They're stopping me," he said. "They're stopping me to give my fuel to that son of a bitch." This is the story of the decision that may have cost the Allies 6 months of war. The story of how Patton was forced to sit and watch while Montgomery launched the most disastrous airborne operation in history. And the story of how one man's ego turned certain victory into catastrophic failure. Because while Patton's tanks sat empty in France, Montgomery's plan was already doomed. They just didn't know it yet. To understand why stopping Patton was insane, you have to understand what Third Army had just accomplished. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces landed in Normandy. The plan was to break out from the beaches, liberate France, and advance toward Germany. The plan worked, but slowly. For 6 weeks, Allied forces fought yard by yard through the hedgerows of Normandy. Progress was measured in hundreds of yards. Casualties were horrific. Then, on August 1st, Patton's Third Army became operational. He was given one mission: break out. Go fast. Don't stop. Patton didn't just break out. He exploded. In 26 days, Third Army advanced 300 miles. They liberated city after city. They destroyed German divisions. They captured tens of thousands of prisoners. German commanders reported to Berlin that the American Third Army was everywhere. They couldn't establish defensive lines. By the time they positioned forces to stop Patton, he was already 50 miles past them. This was blitzkrieg, but better. The Germans had invented mobile warfare, but they relied on horse-drawn supply wagons and limited fuel. Patton had trucks, mountains of trucks, an entire logistics operation designed to keep his tanks moving. When his lead divisions ran low on fuel, supply trucks raced forward with jerry cans. Patton's staff officers organized airlifts. His quartermasters commandeered every vehicle they could find. They called it the Red Ball Express, a continuous stream of supplies racing from the Normandy beaches to the front lines. By late August, Patton was approaching the Moselle River. Beyond that, the German border. Beyond that, the Rhine. Beyond that, Berlin. The German army in France was shattered. There was nothing between Patton and Germany except fuel. And that's when Eisenhower made his decision. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery commanded British and Canadian forces in northern France. He was methodical, careful. He advanced slowly with overwhelming artillery support. By late August, Montgomery's forces were approaching Belgium. Good progress. Professional. Safe. But Montgomery saw something on the map that made him think bigger. If he could capture the bridges across the major rivers in Holland, the Maas, the Waal, the Rhine, he could bypass the German defensive lines completely. He could drive straight into the industrial heart of Germany, the Ruhr. He could end the war. The plan was called Operation Market Garden. Market was the airborne component. 3 Allied airborne divisions would drop behind German lines to capture bridges. Garden was the ground component. British 30 Corps would race up a single highway to link up with the paratroopers. If it worked, the war would be over by Christmas. Montgomery presented the plan to Eisenhower in early September. Eisenhower liked it. It was bold. It was aggressive. It was exactly the kind of plan everyone said Montgomery would never propose. There was one problem: resources. The Allied logistics system was stretched to its breaking point. Every gallon of fuel had to be trucked from Normandy. Every shell. Every meal. There wasn't enough supply capacity to support every army simultaneously. Eisenhower had to choose. Give everything to Montgomery for Market Garden, or give everything to Patton for a drive into Germany. Montgomery argued that his northern route was better. Flat terrain, good roads, direct path to the Ruhr industrial region. Patton's southern route went through the heavily fortified Siegfried Line and mountainous terrain. Montgomery argued that a single concentrated thrust would end the war faster than a broad front advance. Most importantly, Montgomery argued that he needed a victory. British forces had been fighting for 5 years. British morale needed a win. British newspapers needed a hero. And Montgomery needed to prove he was still relevant in an increasingly American-dominated war. Eisenhower made his decision. Montgomery gets priority. Market Garden launches mid-September. Patton's advance stops until Montgomery's operation completes. September 2nd, 1944. Patton received the order. His fuel allocations were cut to a trickle, enough to maintain positions, not enough to advance. He was furious. He called Eisenhower's chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith. "Bedell?" Patton said. "The Germans are on the run. I can be across the Rhine in 2 weeks. I can be in Berlin by October." Smith replied, "George, the decision is made. Montgomery has priority." "Montgomery?" Patton's voice rose. "Montgomery moves like he's afraid the ground will break under him. Give me the fuel and I'll end this war." The answer is no. Patton tried everything. He called Eisenhower directly. He sent detailed reports showing German weakness. He argued that stopping an advancing army was military insanity. He even offered to take his army off the supply system entirely. "Give me nothing," he said. "We'll live off the land like Napoleon. Just don't stop us." The answer remained no. Eisenhower had made a political decision disguised as a military one. He needed to keep the British happy. He needed to prove the alliance worked. He needed to give Montgomery a chance. And so, Patton's tanks sat, engines silent, crews frustrated, while 300 miles north, Montgomery prepared his masterpiece. September 17th, 1944, 1 p.m., Operation Market Garden launched. 35,000 paratroopers dropped into Holland. American 101st Airborne near Eindhoven. American 82nd Airborne near Nijmegen. British 1st Airborne at Arnhem. Their mission? Capture the bridges and hold them until British armor arrived. It was the largest airborne operation in history, bigger than D-Day, more ambitious than anything ever attempted. The planes filled the sky. The Dutch civilians cheered. The paratroopers jumped with confidence. They had no idea they were jumping into a trap. British intelligence had warned Montgomery that German SS panzer divisions were refitting near Arnhem. Montgomery ignored the warnings. He said the Germans were too weak to resist. He said speed would overcome any opposition. The paratroopers landed, and immediately everything started going wrong. The radios didn't work. The drop zones were too far from the bridges. The terrain was worse than the maps showed. And the Germans weren't weak. At Arnhem, the British 1st Airborne Division landed directly on top of 2 SS Panzer divisions. Within hours, German tanks were hunting paratroopers through the streets. The British fought with desperate courage, but they were light infantry with small arms facing armored vehicles and artillery. They held the northern end of the Arnhem Bridge for 4 days. 4 days of house-to-house combat. 4 days of shrinking perimeters. 4 days of waiting for British armor that never arrived. British 30 Corps was supposed to race up a single highway. Hell's Highway, they called it, and reach Arnhem in 2 days. They didn't. The highway was a raised road across flat, flooded terrain. 1 tank wide. Nowhere to maneuver. German forces positioned anti-tank guns along the route and fired into the flanks of the column. Every destroyed British tank blocked the road. Engineers had to push the burning wrecks into the ditches before the column could continue. By September 20th, 30 Corps was still 15 miles from Arnhem. The radio intercepts from the British paratroopers at Arnhem grew desperate. Running low on ammunition. Casualties mounting. Where is 30 Corps? Montgomery sent urgent orders. Push harder, move faster. But armor doesn't move faster when the road is blocked by burning vehicles and the fields on either side are flooded. On September 21st, the British 1st Airborne at Arnhem was overrun. Of the 10,000 men who dropped into Arnhem, fewer than 2,000 made it out. Operation Market Garden was a catastrophic failure. 300 miles south, Patton watched the operation unfold with grim satisfaction. His intelligence officers brought him reports. Market Garden was stalling. Casualties were mounting. Patton told his staff, "I could have told them this would happen. Montgomery doesn't understand mobile warfare. He thinks war is a parade." One of his officers asked, "Sir, if we had gotten the fuel instead, could we have ended the war?" Patton didn't hesitate. "We would be in Berlin right now." Was he right? We'll never know for certain. But the evidence suggests Patton wasn't exaggerating. In late August, German commanders reported that there were no significant reserves between Patton and the Rhine. The German border fortifications, the Siegfried Line, were undermanned. Most of the troops had been pulled forward to stop the Allied advance in France. If Patton had kept moving with full fuel allocations, he would have reached the Rhine in early September, while German defenses were still weak. Crossing the Rhine in September 1944 would have put Allied forces inside Germany months earlier. The Wehrmacht was still reeling. They hadn't had time to reorganize. They hadn't brought reserves from the Eastern Front. A breakthrough in September might have ended the war before Christmas. But Patton was stopped. Montgomery got the fuel. Market Garden failed. And the war continued for 8 more months. In those 8 months, the Battle of the Bulge killed 19,000 Americans. The bombing of German cities killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. The Holocaust continued. Concentration camps kept operating. The Eastern Front saw millions more casualties. The atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. None of this would have been necessary if the war had ended in September 1944. Montgomery's failure at Market Garden wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was a strategic disaster that extended the war and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. After Market Garden collapsed, Montgomery tried to spin the failure as a success. He claimed the operation was 90% successful. He said they had liberated most of Holland. He said they had gained valuable territory. But everyone knew the truth. Arnhem was supposed to be the gateway to Germany. Instead, it became a graveyard for British airborne forces. The price of Montgomery's ego was paid in blood. And the worst part? Montgomery faced no consequences. Eisenhower didn't relieve him. Churchill defended him. The British press praised his bold attempt. Meanwhile, Patton's Third Army finally got fuel allocations restored in late September. But the opportunity was gone. By then, the Germans had reinforced the Siegfried Line. They had brought reserves forward. They had prepared defenses in depth. What could have been a breakthrough in August became a grinding siege in September. Patton did eventually break through. He did eventually cross the Rhine. He did eventually drive into Germany. But it took months, not weeks. December 1944. Patton sat in his headquarters during the Battle of the Bulge. one of his staff officers asked him, "Sir, do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd gotten the fuel in September?" Patton stared at the map. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Every single day." There's a photograph of Patton from late August 1944. He's standing next to a Sherman tank somewhere in France. He's looking east, toward Germany. His face is set, determined. He knows the Germans are beaten. He knows the road is open. And he knows that in a few days, he'll be ordered to stop. That photograph captures the tragedy of September 1944. The moment when the war could have been won, and wasn't. Because one man moved too fast, and another moved too slow. And the bureaucrats chose the wrong one. Operation Market Garden teaches a brutal lesson about coalition warfare. Politics can overrule military logic. Eisenhower knew Patton was the better option. Patton had proven his method worked. He had liberated France in a month. But Eisenhower needed to keep the British happy. He needed to show that Montgomery mattered. So he gave Montgomery the fuel. Montgomery launched an operation based on wishful thinking and ego. And 10,000 British paratroopers paid the price. Patton predicted the failure. He told anyone who would listen that Market Garden would end in disaster. He was right. But being right doesn't matter if the politicians have already made their decision. Here's the hardest question. If Patton had gotten the fuel in September 1944, would the war have ended by Christmas? German commanders interviewed after the war said yes. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt testified that late August 1944 was Germany's most vulnerable moment. "We had nothing left," he said. "If the Americans had kept advancing, we could not have stopped them." Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, said the war could have ended in 1944 if Allied forces had crossed the Rhine before Germany reinforced its defenses. Even British generals privately admitted that stopping Patton was a mistake. But publicly, Montgomery was defended. Market Garden was called almost successful. And the truth was buried under political necessity. September 1944 was the month the war should have ended. The month Patton's tanks should have crossed the Rhine while German defenses were weak. The month Montgomery's ego should have been checked before it killed 10,000 men. But Eisenhower made a political decision. Montgomery got the fuel. Market Garden failed spectacularly, and Patton sat 300 miles south, watching his tanks rust because the fuel went to a plan that everyone except Montgomery knew was doomed. The tragedy wasn't just that Market Garden failed. The tragedy was that success was sitting idle in France, waiting, ready, begging for 3 days of fuel, and being told no. If you believe the fastest army should get the fuel, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see what Patton did when he finally got moving again, the story of how he captured Germany's oldest city and sent Eisenhower the most sarcastic telegram in military history, that video is next. Thanks for watching.